It's 6:15 in the morning. Mary is already awake. She has been awake for a while. She makes breakfast, checks the appointments, organizes the medication, makes sure everything is ready for the day. Her husband needs her, and she is used to being needed. When someone asks Mary how she is, she usually has the same answer: I'm fine. But recently, something has changed. She's tired all the time. She has become more irritable. Sometimes she feels overwhelmed by things that would once have seemed manageable. She doesn't describe herself as emotionally exhausted. She doesn't say, I think I'm experiencing compassion fatigue. Instead, she talks about not sleeping properly, feeling overwhelmed, feeling unlike herself. And sometimes, she simply says she's tired. But what if tiredness is only the language we can find for something much deeper? This question became the starting point for my research. For my undergraduate research project in counselling and psychotherapy, I explored compassion fatigue among spousal caregivers in Ireland. I wanted to understand how professionals recognize it, what therapeutic interventions they use or recommend, and how cultural, gendered, and systemic factors influence the experience of caregiving. I interviewed 12 professionals, 6 general practitioners and 6 psychotherapists. I then analysed their accounts using framework analysis. The term compassion fatigue is often associated with professional caregivers, but the concept has also been extended to informal caregiving. And this matters because when you care for someone you love, the emotional relationship doesn't switch off when your working day ends. There may be no clocking out, no clean boundary between caring and being cared for, no simple distinction between partner and caregiver. Figley's work conceptualized compassion fatigue in relation to the emotional impact of prolonged empathic engagement with another person's suffering. Within spousal caregiving, that emotional closeness can make the experience particularly complex. One of the strongest findings in my research was this: compassion fatigue was often recognized indirectly. Caregivers did not necessarily walk into a healthcare setting and say, I am emotionally exhausted. Instead, professionals described physical symptoms, irritability, emotional overwhelm, and changes in behavior. The distress could be there, but it wasn't always named. And sometimes the person experiencing it didn't have the language or perhaps the permission to name it. The general practitioners in my study occupied an important position. They were often among the first professionals to encounter signs of caregiver strain, repeated attendances, non-specific physical complaints, emotional overwhelm, changes that might initially appear unrelated to caregiving. The GP could provide something incredibly important: recognition, validation, psychoeducation. But recognition did not always lead to sustained psychological intervention. Time pressures, waiting lists, referral options, and service limitations created a gap between seeing the problem and being able to address it. Psychotherapists in my study often encountered caregivers at a different point in the journey. By the time some caregivers reached psychotherapy, the distress had intensified. The conversation could move beyond tiredness, towards guilt, ambivalence, loss of identity, changes in the relationship, and the painful question, who am I now, apart from being the person who cares for my partner? The therapeutic relationship created space for emotions that had perhaps been held back for a very long time. And this is where one of the most important findings of my research emerged. The problem was not necessarily that professionals failed to understand caregiver distress. The problem was the gap between recognition and intervention. The GP might recognize the early signs, but the caregiver might not yet meet a threshold for further support. By the time psychotherapy was accessed, the distress could be much more entrenched. In other words, the system could recognize the problem without being able to respond early enough. My research suggests that prevention matters. What if caregivers were routinely asked how they themselves were coping? What if compassion fatigue was discussed before crisis? What if psychoeducation helped caregivers recognize the signs? What if short-term supportive interventions were available earlier? What if primary care and psychological services worked together rather than caregivers falling between them? Mary's story is fictional, but the pattern behind her story came from real professional accounts. And perhaps that is the most important thing to understand. A caregiver can be functioning and still be suffering. They can be loving and exhausted. They can be committed and overwhelmed. And asking for help does not mean they have failed. One of the conclusions I came to through this research is that compassion fatigue among spousal caregivers cannot be understood simply as an individual failure to cope. It is relational, it is cultural, and it can be systemic. Sometimes what we call resilience may actually be a person surviving without enough support. So the next time someone says, "I'm fine," perhaps we could ask one more question. "And how are you, really?" Because sometimes the person who looks like they're coping is the person who most needs to be seen.